Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wells. I write horror, science fiction, and fantasy, and I talk about games on the internet. Today, I want to talk about Starfinder, which I still think of as new, even though it's like 3 years old at this point. This is the science fiction version of Pathfinder, and I don't have a physical book to show you, I just have the PDF. So you just have to take my word for it that it is enormous. It is well over an inch thick. It is absolutely a dog-crushing size book, and a very cool one. They have done far more than just reskin Pathfinder with a bunch of science fiction stuff. They've adapted the game system, they've changed the classes, they've changed the races, they've changed everything. And in the process, they've created what I consider to be a very cool space fantasy universe that is a lot of fun to play in. So let's take a look at some of the stuff they've done. Okay, we're just kind of going to go through this. Um, not chapter by chapter, but let's start by taking a look at the new races. Now, they have all of the old races. In fact, there's a chapter at the back. Let's show you this one. Chapter 13 is called Pathfinder Legacy, and it is basically just an entire chapter about how to adapt anything from Pathfinder, first edition, to Starfinder. And so if you want to be like if you want to use old spells, if you are the GM and you want to use old monsters, if you want to use old feats, I shouldn't say old feats, if you want to use the fantasy version of the stuff, you can. They also have, let's click through there, all of the original Pathfinder fantasy races completely adapted so that you can use them however you want. And as you read through the lore of the world of Starfinder, the packed worlds and the solar system and the universe, the galaxy at large, a lot of these races show up. The elf, this is probably my favorite picture in the game. The elves and the dwarves show up all over the place, and there's these just cool science fiction versions of all of the core races, which is really cool. Anyway, the neat thing, though, is the new races. So let's have a look at those. They're kind of the new core races, but science fiction version. So they have androids, humans, obviously, Kasatha, which are like almost Protossy in a way. They are the well. Let's go through these one by one. So androids are fun because they are androids. If you've been watching the new Picard series with all the synths, imagine a couple 100 years down the line when there's like tons of them and they're fully integrated into society. They have recently been granted full citizenship and personhood. They're no longer considered constructs or property. And so they've got a lot of neat little powers that you can do. One of the fun things that Starfinder has added to the basic role-playing system is upgrades for equipment. Equipment has levels and equipment can be upgraded. And the android, because they are a robot, they can upgrade themselves with neat stuff. So something you could normally stick in a suit of armor, you can just stick it right into your body, which is a lot of fun. Every race also includes this little thing right here, which is just some really helpful role-playing advice for whatever that species is. We all know what dwarves and elves are, but we haven't seen androids in a Pathfinder game before, and so Starfinder gives us, 3 or 4 points of how you think about yourself, what you are like, and then also what other species think of you, which is really fun. So there you go. Humans are basically just standard humans. They're always the same in Pathfinder, Starfinder systems, old school D&D. You get a bonus feat, you get some skill bonuses, you get to choose whatever your things are. Humans are typically just the adaptable everyman kind of species, and that's what they continue to be in Starfinder. Kasatha, like I said, you can kind of see where I'm coming from with this Protoss stuff, right? They have 4 arms. They're very different and unique from the Protoss, but they are the old, wise, mystical species. And one thing that's interesting about them, you can kind of see here this almost kind of samurai shoulder plates and things on them. They do have a sense of antiquity about them, and they love relying on melee weapons and older stuff. One of their special racial abilities is historian. They have kind of a neat old monks in a temple kind of vibe to them that I really enjoy. Also, I love this. You likely, when playing in Kasatha, keep your mouth hidden behind a scarf in public, carefully tucking food under it and using straws to drink. Why? Because that's neat. That's awesome. I love little details like this, and the book is full of them that show that the authors, the writers, were really thinking about these as cultures and not just as, well, let's have alien race with big, long, pointy skulls. They have actually thought about who these people are and the fact that they come from a culture that is very alien to our own. Okay, La Junta. These are neat. They've got antennas and they have psychic powers. You know how in original D&D and in Pathfinder, almost every race has dark vision, and it gets to the point where it's kind of annoying because most of the party can just see in the dark without torches? Well, in Starfinder, there's only one that has dark vision, but there are multiple that have telepathy as an innate power. The Lashunta are one of them. They have some limited telepathy. They also have some kind of core psychic powers, which is really neat. The Lashunta come in 2 different forms. There's the tall, kind of elegant one, which gets, what are their bonuses here? +2 intelligence and -2 constitution as their attribute bonuses. And then this kind of stockier warrior one that gets +2 strength and -2 wisdom as their starting attributes. And so they're both part of the same species, but in 2 different forms, which is neat. Let's look at the Shirin. These are the insects. These are formerly from a hive mind. And so they, A, are very good at teamwork, but B, they love the fact that they're not in a hive mind anymore. And one of their fun little cultural details is that they are delighted by freedom and individuality. And so it's this neat blend of what we typically think of as space bug people, while also being these kind of wide-eyed, naive, yay, look, we get to do whatever we want. There's not a queen controlling our mind, which is really neat. And they are also telepathic. So let's have a look then at the next one, the Vesk. These are your standard large lizard things. You know, Star Trek has them, and everyone seems to have their big, scary lizard race. And that's what these guys do. And they are the ones that have low light vision. If you need somebody who's big and strong, then now you have somebody who's big and strong. But we are not done yet because we also have the tiny little ones. If you love playing halflings or gnomes, the Ysoki are for you. They are the kind of little mouse people. One of their racial powers is they have cheek pouches that can store up to 1 pound of material in them. I have never been more delighted by a core racial power in a role-playing game, probably in my life. If you want to play a sneaky space gerbil that can carry things in its mouth, that's amazing. And Starfinder is such a crunchy rules system. It's so mechanic driven that I love how they really get into detail on this. You can transfer a single object between hand and cheek as a swift action. A Ysoki can disgorge the entire contents of his pouch onto the ground in his square as a move action that does not provoke an attack of opportunity. Like, I love that. If I ever play a species other than Ysoki, I will be very surprised when I play Starfinder because it's so great. And those are the core new Starfinder races. There's a lot of variety in them, and they're not just, like I said, reskins of the Pathfinder races. You can totally play elves and dwarves and halflings and stuff if you want, but these new ones are more interesting. I shouldn't say more interesting. I should say they're unique. they add to things instead of just being, well, this one's the space orc and this one's the space dwarf and things like that. They have a lot of cool new ideas wrapped up in them. The same can be said of the classes. Let's take a look at the classes, which is the very next chapter. And so some of these do feel like they have analogs in a way. So, for example, the mystic is kind of sort of like a cleric in that it draws its power from a higher source. But it doesn't rely on you worshiping a source. It's not a priest. They can be, but they don't have to be. The Solarian is kind of sort of paladin-y, but also kind of sort of barbarian-y. Anyway, let's take a look at each of them in turn because they're really interesting. So the first one is the Envoy. This is just kind of I wanted to say your standard talking class, but it isn't really standard in any way. I don't know if it has an analog in Pathfinder or D&D because their power is that they are good at talking to people. In that sense, you might say it's almost like a bard, but they're not. In Star Trek, this would be the diplomat or the captain or somebody like that. And so they've got, what is it called? Envoy improvisations. And so you get a certain number of improvisations, and you can see you get new ones every other level. And you get expertise in things, and you get better at skills, and then you have access to these improvisations that are just neat things that you can do that are, they're not magic powers, and a lot of them are not, most of them are not combat powers. They're just cool stuff that makes you better at doing various things. Some of them are sword fighting, some of them are talking to people, some of them, there's a taunt here. You can rally people. I guess bard songs would be the closest comparison, but they're really their own thing, and they're a lot of fun. The mechanic, I love the mechanic because it's a pet class, even though that doesn't sound like it would be. The mechanic here is not just the guy who can fix the ship. It's not just chief engineer. The mechanic comes with, and starts at the first thing, an artificial intelligence, whether that is a little drone that follows you around or an AI that kind of is built into your brain and can help you with stuff. You choose one of those at level 1, and then as you go along, you can upgrade it. Your artificial intelligence that follows you around and helps you out will get better at doing stuff. And depending on which form of it you chose, it will get better at doing different things. And so the mechanic is, in a sense, two flavors of the same class. It comes with a custom rig, which is like your cool tools that let you do stuff. You have a bunch of mechanic tricks, which are similar to the Envoy improvisations, in which there's just a bunch of them, and you can choose them as you level up and get a bunch of different things. Not exactly spells, more like neat tricks you can pull by being a great mechanic. Let's look at the Mystic now. The Mystic is, like I said, kind of sort of cleric-ish in that they get a bunch of spells, and those spells come through a connection to some kind of powerful thing. In a way, you can look at this as a standard cleric, except instead of picking the god you want to worship, you pick the domains you want access to and then reverse engineer the god from there, sort of. And the book does have an enormous list of deities that you can worship or interact with in Starfinder, and a pretty wide range of them. But let's take a look at the connections, because there's a bunch of them. And this one, for example, shows why I keep saying your connection to a powerful thing rather than to a deity. This one says, you've linked to the collective knowledge of every sentient species that's ever lived that's held in the Akashic Record, an astral library of perfect psychic records of every moment in history. So it's not that you worship that library. It's not that you are a priest of that library. It's that you are mentally, psychically, magically connected to a vast space library, and through that library you will gain magic powers. And down here it has associated deities, and there's a bunch of them, including Nyarlathotep, which I love. There's all these different deities that are explained later on, and you can pick one of those, or you can just say the library. You can kind of do whatever you want and sculpt this thematically around however you want to be. You want to focus your powers on empathy. You want to be a healer. Same thing. Different deities you can choose from, but really what you're choosing is the powers that you have access to. They have a Mind Breaker, which is kind of a psychic combat one. Star Shaman, Xeno Druid, which I totally love if you want to get your druid action in. I didn't show this with the other classes, but every class includes 2 kind of examples of what you can do with that. And theme, we'll talk about themes a little later, but for right now, if you want to be a Crusader Chaplain, well, here's a way to take the mystic and turn it into that specific thing. If you want to be an empathic priesty kind of thing, well, here's an example of how you can take the mystic and convert it into that. Next you have the operative, which is basically a rogue. It's a spy that can do some neat things. They have operative's edge. They can specialize in stuff. They're sneaky, and they're a good combat class and a good, all these specializations, like I said, that you can really hone and focus your character in a unique way. And that's one of the things you're seeing with all these classes, that each class has a lot of customization options. No 2 operatives are going to be exactly the same. No 2 mystics, no 2 mechanics. Okay, so Solarian. This is the one I said is kind of like a paladin, kind of like a barbarian. And thematically, it's not really like either of those. But in mechanical terms, what you have is the ability to gain magic combat powers. And specifically, you have this solar manifestation. And a, what's the other one called? The stellar mode. So the solar manifestation is, you have like a mote of a star. The Solarian, as you can guess by the name, is connected to the stars in some way and draws power, magic, etc. from them. So the solar manifestation is a little mote of sun that kind of orbits your head, and you can choose to manifest it as armor or as a weapon. You pick one of the 2 during character creation, right at first level, and then that's how it is for the rest of the time. You either have magic armor or you have a magic weapon. And I do love what it says here about the weapon, that the appearance doesn't matter. It can be a sword, it can be a, where is it down here? The general design. Normal melee weapons like axes, swords, and spears are the most common, but other shapes, such as a large rune of stellar energy, a mass of writhing energy tendrils, or an energized fist that fits over your own hand, are possible as well. And so there's a lot of, just kind of, none of those matter. They don't mechanically change it, but again, you can customize how your character works and feeds. Now, stellar mode is interesting. This is almost like going into a battle rage. But it's not exactly the same. Basically, when you start combat, you can pick to be in graviton mode, which is like you're gaining the powers of a black hole, or you can pick photon mode, in which you're just gaining the powers of a sun, or you can just choose unattuned, in which you don't gain the powers of either one. And each round, you can choose to change modes, and the longer you stay in a mode, the more closely you attune to it. And so then as you fight, you start getting these stellar revelations, which basically are special powers that affect the mode, or that use the mode you're in order to cause effects. So for example, black hole. If you are attuned to graviton, if you're in graviton mode, you can pull people towards you. And it's really fun. If you are in photon mode, you can supernova, which will damage everybody around you. And then as you go up, those are the 2 that you get at level 1. As you level up, you can get more powerful ones, and they will change what you can do or they will get more powerful based on attunement. So, for example, where was the one that I wanted to show off? This one, just right here, Dark Matter. If you're graviton attuned, you gain damage reduction. And the damage reduction is just 1, and it eventually goes up higher at higher levels. But when you are attuned or fully attuned, then your damage reduction from dark matter is equal to half of your Solarian level. So once you stay in it for 3 or 4 rounds without switching into Solarian mode, or into it's all Solarian, into photon mode, then your damage reduction suddenly gets powerful because you are staying in graviton mode. Anyway, it's a lot of fun. This kind of stance dancing idea that is present in some games, they put it in here, and they've done a really good job of making it interesting. Soldier, this is a fighter, right? This is a standard fighting class. They come with fighting styles. They can do neat things. They gain a bunch of extra combat feats. It's a very straightforward, but a very fun and effective class that has a lot of the same kinds of customization options that the other classes have. You have gear boosts that you can do. You can really be different from every other soldier in the game. So, hooray! Now, Technomancer is the last one. This is the other core spellcasting class. They have a lot, it's just like the soldier is a very basic, straightforward melee fighter or ranged fighter, mundane combatant. The Technomancer is a very straightforward magic user, made more interesting in the magic hacks. And so in some ways these are kind of like the things sorcerers can do. You gain these extra powers that allow you to change the way a spell functions and kind of hack into your own spell. And what's fun about the spells, and since we're done with the classes, let's jump all the way to the spells and take a look at those. Where are you, spells? Here we go. The spells, the spell list is different as well. First of all, it only goes up to level 6. And so you don't have some of the giant world-changing spells that you would get in core Pathfinder in a fantasy game. But you do have still very powerful spells, and a lot of them are based on technological ideas. So you can see here you've got a lot of the normal stuff. These are in alphabetical order, and then they will list which spell level they are. Animate Dead is a 4th level spell for both a Mystic or a Technomancer. Arcane Eye you can only get as a Technomancer, and so on. A lot of the same basic stuff you're used to, like Arcane Sight, but then you get stuff like Arcane Surge, which says, you cause an electrical device in your possession to surge in power and unleash a line of electricity from the massive oversurge, and then it causes a ton of damage. It's a 3rd level spell. It's kind of like a lightning bolt spell, but adapted and altered for a science fiction universe. The Technomancer has several junk bot spells that they have access to that are basically summons, but you're using the technology in your area to build this neat little robot that will then fight for you or do various things for you. There's several different junk bot spells. So I like what they've done with spells here. It's a lot of fun. So hooray for that. Now let's take a look at, we did not, I told you I was going to tell you about themes. So this is an innovation in Starfinder. In core Pathfinder, in core D&D, you define your character by choosing a race and a class. And in Starfinder, you also are going to be picking a theme. So, where's the themes? Here we go. Every character has one of these. And what they do is they give you some extra little things you can do that help guide your character in a certain direction. And you can combine any theme with any class and any race. So if you want that mystic to be very priesty, then you can just choose priest. And then, you are directly aligned with a deity of some kind, and you're a little more priest-like. But you could also combine it with an outlaw, with a bounty hunter, with any of these other things. You could combine the Technomancer with the Ace Pilot and then be almost like a Luke Skywalker kind of character who's a super ace pilot but also a magical warrior. Do some fun things that way. So, uh, when you choose a theme, it's going to give you an attribute bonus, and then it is going to give you a handful of little powers. And the first one, in every case, is just theme knowledge. You're a bounty hunter? Well, then before you get powers, you're going to gain a bunch of knowledge. This is going to help give backstory to your character and help guide you down a certain path in terms of what you know and how you interact with the world and with the other characters. Themes, I think, are a lot of fun. We're seeing similar things in other games. I like the way that it's been handled in this one. Um, there, I'm not gonna bother going through the rules and stuff. It's got feats, it's got tactical combat, it's got all that kind of stuff. If you have played Pathfinder before, if you have played Dungeons and Dragons before, then you basically already know this game system, the core premise of it. It's a D20 system. You've got the same 6 attributes. Most things are going to be very familiar, and you're going to be able to play it very easily. Some of the tweaks mostly just come from the setting. So let's look at the skill list here. The skill list is a little different. It has things like computers. It has engineering. It has mysticism is basically arcana, but it's got piloting, and that's going to come in handy for spaceships, which is the last thing we're going to talk about, and I'm saving it for last because it's fun. So it's still the system that you know, but tweaked for the new thing. I'm not going to talk about equipment. You can, I'll show you the equipment really quick. You have levels for items, and so you can do a lot of neat things, and it's got a ton of different kinds of weapons, both melee and ranged, all technological and science fictional. But let's take a look at the starships. Okay, starship combat, first of all, is really fun. They have done a good job of giving roles to everyone. So it is not just the pilot who's making all the roles. You're going to have a pilot, you're going to have an engineer, you're going to have a captain, you're going to have different things. And you actually assign these roles to the people in your party. And when you get into starship combat, there are 3 phases, and those phases determine who can act when. And basically, the captain's power is that he or she can act during any of the 3 phases. And so after something has happened, you've tried to maneuver and now it's time to do something else, well, your science officer or your engineer can try to give you a bonus, or try to debuff the enemy ship in some way before the gunner gets a chance to shoot at it. And so anyway, it has all of this stuff. It talks all about how to travel around. It talks about drift navigation, which is this game's take on faster than light travel, which is kind of like a hyperspace idea. And then it talks about how to read a starship list. And then you get to the building a starship section, which I really think is a lot of fun. And when you start as a group, it says that the game assumes every party has access to their own starship. And so you will start with, this is the base starship statistics. And if everyone is level 1, then you start here with, average player level is 1, right there, which I can't select. There we go. And that gives you 55 build points. So then you get to go through here and start building it. Well, what kind of chassis do you want to have? Do you want to have this light freighter that costs 10 of your build points? It's small, it's kind of maneuverable, has a maximum crew of 6, so that might work pretty well for you and gives you a lot of points. You can, slightly tweak that to get the explorer that's a little bigger, slightly tweak that to get the transport that's a little different, all the way up to, on the next page, something like a carrier, a battleship, or a dreadnought. These are your Star Destroyers, your capital ships, which, have this enormous cost of 200 build points. And so your player characters are not going to be starting with one of those, but you might have to tangle with one at some point. Then you use those same build points to buy your power core, which is going to give you power, to buy your thrusters, which will determine how fast and maneuverable you are. You can buy armor, you can buy a computer system, and then there's a bunch of other neat things that you can slot in there. Do you want to have a big cargo hold? Do you want to have escape pods? Do you want to have the little smuggling compartments, Han Solo style? You can build your ship using those build points to end up with kind of anything you want. And then, of course, there are weapons that you can buy and add on. And it gives some, let's find them, example ships. Eoxian is kind of the undead, and so this looks like a whale carcass almost. And so it gives their big carrier ship, it gives their little fighter ship, and then it gives this sepulcher, which is like a, I don't know what the sepulcher would be called. It's a transport ship. And the Eoxian ones, you can see all of their stats here, and you can see their style. Now, the Kasathan have a very different style to their ships, and they look very different, and they have different capabilities. And it gives these, the Pact Worlds are kind of the core setting, and some of those ships look like that. The Shirin are those insects that we talked about, and their ships look very insectile, and I love this one in particular with the big kind of thorax of a wasp on the back. So anyway, there's a lot of those. So now let's talk about Starship Combat. And I want to spend some time on this because it is the thing that is most different from core Pathfinder. You do have a captain, an engineer, a gunner, a pilot, and a science officer. You can have more. You can assign extra people to those roles if you want. But then you go through it and you have the rounds. First is the engineering round. And there are a bunch of specific actions that you can take based on your role. And so if you're the engineer, you get to act first in the round. And this could be something like, I'm going to boost the engines, so that then when you get to phase 2, the helm, your pilot will be able to go faster, or will be able to maneuver better, or something. Engineering is also when you can fix problems. If you got damaged, if you lost something last round, then you can try to patch it up. And gunnery is when you shoot. So the science officer and the captain have different things. The captain can act in any phase of combat. The actions the captain can take are described later. And then the science officer acts during the helm phase of combat. Let's take a look at the different actions that people can have. Oh, it's got some of these things. It recommends using hexes for space combat rather than squares. And it does recommend also that you use a hex map, because in space combat, facing matters in a way that it doesn't in normal combat. I'm very much a theater of the mind kind of GM. And so when I run Starfinder, I try to use theater of the mind, and it works okay. But if you are going to use minis, use a hex map instead of the square map. So let's take a look at this. There's different stunts that you can do, blah, blah, blah. It talks about all the movement. It talks about how to attack. But let's get to the part, here we go, crew actions. So if you're the captain, demand, encourage, taunt, give orders. There's different things that you can do as captain to kind of help your crew in general, or to influence the combat in some way. If you are, and they also have this moving speech, which I love, but that's a 12th level thing. Engineers can divert power from one system to another. Nice common science fiction trope that they've integrated really well into their game. Hold it together, patch, they can fix things. You can overpower a system so that it gets stronger. You can see why the engineering phase is first, because they are the ones who are kind of setting up the tools, preparing the ship for everyone else to act during their phase. Gunner is a lot more interesting than just shoot. They've got shoot, but they also have broadside. They have fire at will. They have precise targeting. They have a lot of options to take as they go. And then the pilot, of course, isn't just flying. They can maneuver around. They can do those stunts we looked at earlier, like barrel rolls. They can do all kinds of neat things. And then the science officer, this is where it gets kind of fun. Science officers can scan things. They can lock the weapons on to make them better in the gunnery phase. They can target specific systems. The science officer really has an integral role in combat. So, anyway, Starship Combat, they've really taken their time with it. It's not just normal combat, but in space. They are really considering the party as a crew, giving everybody a job so that everybody feels like they are necessary and involved and having fun while they're in space. And it uses a lot of the same skills or the same specialties that you would have. So if you're a soldier and you're kind of the thug down on the ground, you're likely to have a lot of the same skills that you need to be a good gunner up in space. So nobody is going to get left out when you get into Starship Combat. And it's got a nice little, script here that you can read through as an example of combat play. So it's fun. Now let's take a look at the setting itself. That'll be our final thing. Because like I said, they've taken their time with this. They've really developed an interesting world with a lot of specific stuff. It can be used, absolutely, in the same way that Pathfinder is, to just represent a generic space fantasy world with ships and magic and monsters and stuff. But they've also taken the time to come up with a really deep, really cool setting that is worth getting to know. The core of that setting is called the Packed Worlds, and that is a single. Can we get it to show you two things at once? I don't know how to do that. The Packed Worlds are a single solar system, and there's a map of them somewhere. Here we go. That has a ton of planets in it, including the sun. That was one of the things that I was kind of surprised and delighted by, is that the sun is actually inhabited. There are some lost cities inside of it, inside of bubbles, and you can teleport in and out. And so there's some fun things going on there. Absalom Station is kind of the core of everything. There used to be a planet here called Golarion, and it is gone, and nobody knows why, but it's there. So you can see this is the second half of the same map, and if I could make it show 2 pages at once, it would show 2 pages at once, but such is not my lot today. I actually want to show you this is the little things that are inside of the sun. It's like a giant space cathedral inside of the sun, and there's different nodes, and they're all connected to each other. It's really cool. Anyway, all these worlds are described. It talks about the diameter, the mass, the gravity that they have. It gives a bunch of different ideas of things that could happen there. Absalom Station is, like I said, the core of everything. I really like Starfinder. I really like what they've done with it. This could have been a very quick and easy reskin of Pathfinder into science fiction. And instead they have taken the time to reconsider their core game system and modify it here and there. It's a little more streamlined than normal Pathfinder is. It's a little less crunchy while still maintaining a lot of the mechanical complexity that makes Pathfinder what it is. They also have really delved into the story and the creative behind it. The creative director, kind of the overseeing mastermind of the entire game, was James Sutter, who was one of the originators of Pathfinder and always one of their main story people, and they just gave him the reins of Starfinder, and you can absolutely see that has paid off with a lot of really great story, a lot of really great setting, a lot of flavor and specificity to it that makes it a lot of fun. It comes with a ton of supplements. There's a monster manual that we'll be looking at a little later on in the year. There's a bunch of adventures that have been published for it. It is a great game. It's hard for me to consider any space fantasy, science fiction fantasy combo without immediately thinking of Phase World, which was one of the settings for the Rifts game. I love Phase World and have, you know, been a huge fan of that and a player of that for years. Uh, and because Phase World is so good, I've never really been interested in other space fantasy games. Starfinder is the one that might win me over. I am a big fan of both of them. I love them a lot. Uh, and so the fact that it can supplant Phase World in my heart at all, let alone to this fantastic degree that it has, I think speaks really highly of it. So, anyway, Starfinder is great, and I encourage everyone to get a chance to try it out. And I hope that if you do, you love it as much as I do. Anyway, thanks for watching this review. I will see you on my next one. Bye.